Welcome to the Heartification podcast, where I interview people on how art has affected their lives and what it means to them. Art has a very special place in my life. It not only makes me feel happy, but it allows me to make others feel special. This podcast is all about how art has made an impact on others' lives, for all ages, all backgrounds, and all walks of life. You can find more about this podcast guest in my show notes. Without further ado, let's welcome my next guest. He is a podcast host, speaker, author, and communication strategist. Please welcome my next guest, Christoph Trappe.
Hi there, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for being on my podcast.
You bet.
So the first question I always ask is, how do you define art?
That's always an interesting question. So first of all, what I do is, it's art and science, and some people hate to hear it. But, in content creation, content marketing, there is a lot of gut feeling or intuition, and then you got to back it up with the numbers, right? See if it's working. But at the end of the day, creating content, writing or podcasting, there's certainly some art involved because you're kind of putting your own spin on things.
Yeah, definitely. And my definition is any way you're able to express yourself. And you can do that when you're creating content and when you're creating, different things.
Well, your definition is a lot more concise than what I just said.
And what art forms are you exposed to?
Well, so there's a lot of different art out there, right? I mean, even if you think about writing and performative art, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of that at the community level, I guess. Probably don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but all kinds of different things. Photography is art to an extent. Videography, all those different things. So there's always some type of art or, whatever people want to call it involved in many different things.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. And how do you use creativity in what you do?
Well, I think, even though marketing and communications is more and more numbers driven, at the end of the day, you do have to be creative, right? To stay in front of people. Think about what you're doing, 20 years ago, we didn't have podcasts. It was called radio, right? And now this is how you get in front of people. And now we have live streaming, which I do all the time. And then you have, whatever is new, you got to try different things. You got to draw people in. And the only way to do that is you have to be creative and try different things and engage people.
Yeah, exactly. And people are looking for that something that's different. And then they can look to and say, oh, that's cool. I want to, watch that video or, listen to that or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
And do you see speaking and communication as an art form? And if so, why?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I do, but not just speaking and listening, because sometimes I think speaking and communicating, because sometimes I think people use it as an excuse to not have to listen and not have to try to understand, right? And they say, it's your communication style blows or whatever, right? And you know what? People also have to listen. People also have to be open to different ideas. But absolutely, I think there is some words, you have to pick your words carefully. Words mean something, right? So definitely, I think there's an art to that and also an understanding of what those words mean. I think it's okay to pick the wrong ones, but you just have to say, yeah, that's not the right word. Maybe that's too strong. Even that buttering it up, can help you get the point across, even if you did pick a word that's too strong. But absolutely. And the other thing is, people have first impressions, all the time, and so it definitely is an art. And it depends on the other person too, how do different cultures take different things differently and whatnot.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. And do you think that there is an artistic side to storytelling?
Well, I think there has to be, because at the end of the day, you have to create something that engages people, right? And how do you do that? Sometimes you think about, you get in the zone, right? So when I do live streams, when I do podcasts, I try to batch them together. Now I do them only every 3 months, for basically days at a time, not quite days, but, at a big time commitment right there. So you have to be you have to be creative. You have to figure out, how do you tell that story in the best way, and how do you reach people? And I'm telling you, that has never been harder, because when I grew up in journalism, I never worried about how do I reach people. I just created the best thing I could create, and people got the newspaper, and that was the end of that. And now today, everybody can reach anybody in theory, but to actually make it work, you have to, stand out differently. And I think that's how that can help you.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also amazing to see how the world has evolved and how art has evolved with it. Like now with technology and stuff, we have digital art and all of that. Like back in the day when there were cavemen, they were like drawing on the caves and stuff, which was art. And now we have, like digital art, which is also an art on like iPads and computers and stuff like that. And it's so cool to see how art has, developed over the years.
Well, and think about it this way. So I heard a VP at Adobe talk about this previously. So his theory is that down the road, I don't know when, but a guy like me, first, let me back up. First of all, a guy like me who's not a designer can already design now, right? Because of tools like Canva make it easier than ever. It's unbelievable. But what he is saying is that down the road, you can just sit here and go, do this and do that, and okay, whatever. Without me knowing anything about the mechanics, I can design. You know what I mean? So my point is, I think I couldn't have, do whatever in the cave. I can't draw, forget about handwriting, horrible. But I think all those tools will make that even easier. And the people that choose to participate and figure out how to do it, I think that's a fantastic tool and differentiator too.
Yeah, definitely. And how important do you think creativity is when telling a story, especially when you want to capture the audience's attention?
Well, you have to, because creativity is needed to figure out what can you do that's different. What can you do to stand out? How can you do, how can you move forward? I'll give you an example. When I was working with United Way, we did videos, and everybody does videos at United Way, but we did different videos, right? We had like very innovative storylines. Like one time we told the story through a baseball game. So we basically, the local single A club let us use their stadium, and all these board members were there, and like one hit something and another person caught and said, well, and then I have to catch it because of whatever, right? And some people might say it's a little cheesy, and it certainly is, but cheesy also has a place in storytelling because it gets your attention, unless it's just totally silly, So you have to figure out, how do you tell that story differently, and how are you creative and figure out how to get people's attention and keep it.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said before, it's that element of like creativity and something being different and unique that is going to capture people's attention and make them want to learn more about what you're doing.
Exactly. And that's what it's all about, right? How do you pull people in, and how do you get them to care about what you're talking about? That's always a good challenge.
Yeah, exactly. And should creativity be used along the whole marketing journey for a company?
So some people will tell you everything is numbers based, right? We got to look at the number, and that's fine. We should look at the numbers, but yeah, absolutely, it should be used everywhere, because at the end of the day, if you're not creative, how are you going to connect with people? Even how you reach them, even how you talk to them. I'll give you an example. The next salesperson that sends me an email that says, I hope you're doing well, I have an email drafted that tells them all my life's problems. And I said, thank you for asking. I'm happy to hop on a call with you. Here's all, what I'm talking about. Do you get those emails? Maybe not yet.
No.
But that's everybody else who's listening. They will know, probably anybody in business. So it's not creative, right? Like everybody's saying, I hope you're doing well. I'm like, well, I'm not, because you're wasting my time. So, at the end of the day, find a more creative way to connect with me, right? And so I think it's more important than ever, quite frankly.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the awesome part about art is it can bring people together. Like you said, people can connect to it. Like if you listen to a song, so many people love that song, and it can just bring a group together, and they can just, relate to the song and relate to each other, which is really cool about art, because it can just bring so many people from around the world, different aspects of life just together based on like a painting or a song.
Yep, exactly.
And I see writing as an art form. So do you feel you were able to express yourself when writing your book?
I do, but what's interesting about writing, it's a lot more by formula today than it used to be. And that's good and bad, right? Because, back in the day, I mean, you think about how do you write a story that's interesting and whatnot. But today, I measure my content all the time. I said, oh, is this good for SEO? Is this readable? Is it, too difficult to read? So, but I don't take that as a barrier. I take that as a guidance, right? So yes, I want to get the green buttons and I will get them, but I'm still trying to be creative, right? And it's not, they don't measure in a way that makes you be less creative, but there are some rules, if you have long sentences, you're going to put people to sleep. I don't care how creative you think that sentence is. It's not. So, you have to have a good mix. And so I think there is that good balance, honestly, between the two. But at the end of the day, yes, you want to express yourself, but you also want people to read it. Because if it's only about expressing myself, I don't need to publish it, right? I can just write on a piece of paper, or I can write, like on The Office, where Creed did a blog and they just open a Word document for him. It's like I can just do that. So I think it's a balancing act a little bit, but for sure, everything I do, I enjoy very much. I love creating content, and so much easier when you write about topics that you care about that are interesting.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. And when you are doing your live broadcasts, how much creativity is used when trying to make a point?
Well, so it depends on how people define creativity, but I think it's creative just to figure out where the conversation goes, right? So my live streams are now 27 minutes because they also broadcast, they re-air on television. So I think it's actually quite a challenge to get everything into 27 minutes, right? Because you can have a conversation and it's a pretty hard stop. So you always, I think that's creative, just figuring out how do you make it interesting? How do you share the story? Also, how do you ask questions? I think interviews that ask horrible questions also get horrible answers sometimes, depending on who you're interviewing, right? If you're interviewing somebody who's got their talking points down, you could say anything to them and they'll still talk about whatever they want to talk about, and you still get good answers. But like a lot of people, you need to ask good questions. And I think that's especially, on podcasts, that's important.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. And art can be therapeutic and it can help people through difficult situations. So has art ever helped you through a difficult situation?
Well, music, certainly, it's a good help to tune things out. And now, funny side story, I have the AirPod Pros, and sometimes I put them in just to have quiet without even playing music, right? Because they have noise cancellation. So that's kind of interesting. But music for sure. I don't know. I guess on TV, I only really watch sports, quite frankly. I don't watch very many movies and stuff like that. But now, you can read a book in no time. And this is what's beautiful, I think, about technology. Like if I want to buy a new book on, I was reading Amy Morin's 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. And I decided to want to read it. And I just order it. I get it on my iPad like in 5 seconds. I don't have to wait. So that's really nice. You can just dive in. You don't have to say, oh, let's order this book and we'll read it together next week. And I'm like, well, if I got something I need to address today, why do I need to wait for the mail?
Yeah, definitely. And there's also like audiobooks and podcasts and all of that now.
Yeah, I don't listen to podcasts too. Amy does have a really good podcast, and I guess that's one. The other ones I listen to mostly are like you learn things, they're not, I don't listen to like crime podcasts or anything like that. So it's mostly like I'm learning something. Some of them are sports talk shows, basically. But you're right. I'm not a huge fan of audiobooks, honestly. And I think that's because what happens is when you listen to a podcast, somebody says something, and if you're driving or whatever, now you're thinking about what they said and you might miss the next whatever many minutes, right? That's fine on a podcast because you're going to ask another question in a minute, right? And I'll answer that question. We'll talk about it. If people missed half of my answer, they'll still survive. They can still listen to the show. But if they miss that much in an audiobook, like they almost have to go back. So I think that's why I personally don't like audiobooks, but I think some people love them. I also don't think it's reading. It's more like, you know what I mean? Because reading is like, you have to look at it, but I don't know. Maybe I'm showing my age with that opinion.
Yeah, and the cool thing about reading is that you can like visualize what's happening. Like whenever I'm reading a book, I always like try to visualize how the characters would look like and kind of in my mind create like a movie of some sort of what's happening in the book. So I think that's the cool thing about reading. And I've never really listened to an audiobook before, but I don't know if you can get the same experience with an audiobook.
Probably not. And so for fiction, absolutely, I do that too. For nonfiction, what I like, especially business books, not everything is interesting to everybody, right? So it's like in an audiobook, you have to listen to everything. And when you read it, you can go, oh, this next chapter or whatever. I don't care about that topic. And you just skip ahead. And I'm I love that nonlinear experience for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. And are you attracted to any particular artist?
Oh, that's always a good question. And I never have good answers to that question, honestly. A good artist. I mean, what's a good artist, right? Like a good writer. Joe Pulizzi certainly is a good writer on the business side. Amy Morin, I mean, her books are fantastic. There's always something to learn in them. I don't know. What do I listen to? I listen to like the current music usually. Whatever pops up there.
Yeah, that's awesome. And there's so many different like artists out there that sometimes it's just so hard to like choose one artist.
Yeah.
And are you attracted to any particular art form?
So what's interesting about that question is like you barely notice it, right? Unless you're like a real big fan. Definitely into sports. I think sports is an art form to an extent too. I mean, a lot of things really are. Definitely music. What else? Reading, definitely for sure. I think I mentioned like the performing arts earlier, like really not into that at all. And you know what? If you look so when I say sports, I think of like football or something. But when you look like even the Olympics, like that's definitely artistic. Some of the things they pulled off there. So I think that's always interesting to see what people are capable of doing.
Yeah, definitely. And my heartification project is all about giving back to the community. So how do you give back to the community?
Well, I mean, certainly I share my knowledge or what I think is knowledge out there wide and freely. I mean, most of my content you don't have to pay for. I used to volunteer a lot more. In the last year, I guess everybody just kind of is stuck in their homes, and that has changed a little bit, but slowly but surely we get back to that. And then we just participate in community events and those kind of things. But I think sharing your thoughts, your knowledge, especially through podcasting, I think that's a great way to do that too.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. And the cool thing about, sharing your thoughts and things is if you talk about one topic with a bunch of people, everybody is going to have, a different take on it or, a different idea about it. And they always like teach us this in school to like listen to everybody's ideas. And you're like, oh yeah, just because it's nice to listen to what someone else has to say. The thing is, if you actually think about it, everybody will have a different idea based on one topic, based on their past experiences. And you can take all of that and, create a new cool idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm a big fan of the plusing model, right? And I think Pixar and Disney came up with that first, or Apple maybe. No, Pixar and Disney, right? So every idea, there's really no bad ideas, right? You just plus the ideas and you come up with better things. And that's, I think, how a lot of good things happen. Most good ideas that you see out there, they didn't come from like one try, right? They came from people working together and plussing crappy ideas sometimes. So, and that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. And how would you like people to get in touch with you?
AuthenticStorytelling.net is a good way. Twitter, C-Trap. You can just connect with me on LinkedIn if you like. Please make sure you let me know that you heard me on this podcast. Don't send me one of those messages on LinkedIn saying you're human, I'm human, we should connect. So let's have a good relationship on there as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on my podcast.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Remember, if you want to find out more about this guest, please go to my show notes where I have all the links needed. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to my podcast series and help me by sharing it, leaving a rating, and a comment. I hope you join me on my next podcast. Bye for now.